Okay, welcome to Rambam. We continue with the laws of Psuli HaMukdashim, laws in the Holy Temple of those things that make invalid that which is sanctified. Chapter 2. So, with regard to the presentation of blood from any of the sacrifices on the outer altar, as long as one makes one presentation of blood atonement, atonement is generated, right? So this is just, metaphorically, blood is the passion of the from the animal. And if it's um, a sin offering, so then for something that a person did inadvertently, having a passion in the wrong place, so then it's the blood that needs to go on the altar of God, right? So as long as you made one presentation, one presentation means one, like just putting it on the altar or on the corner of the altar, depending on what of the altar. Yeah, it's on the corner. So even with regard to a sin offering, one presentation is of fundamental importance. Making remaining three of the four required presentations is merely the optimum manner of fulfilling the mitzvah as implied by the verse. The blood of your sacrifice shall you pour on the altar. One can infer that one pouring of the blood on the altar is of a fundamental importance. As it says, Dam is avachim yishafech. The Hebrew, so it's singular tense. It's a singular tense, singular form, not plural. So that it says to pour, like it could be pourings or just pour. So therefore, from there we understand that to gain the atonement, one is sufficient, or to validate it, whatever the offering is. Whenever a kayin or blood over the altar, when he should have cast it upon it, cast it meaning, so there's pouring it on the altar. It's not on the altar, it's like it's on the side of the altar where it goes down into the ground and is taken through a river that goes underneath the altar that carried the water. So, but sometimes you have to sprinkle it on the corners. So what if you did that versus the sprinkling? The obligation is fulfilled as implied by the verse. The blood of your sacrifice shall you pour. Hmm. What if you did the other way around? Doesn't say. Interesting. Okay. With regard to all of the blood presented on the inner altar, right? If one of the presentations is lacking, the sacrifice does not bring atonement. Instead, all of them are integral to the atonement, as it says in the verse regarding their number, states 7 times. So it says clearly they have to do it 7 times. So therefore, if you're lacking any of it, right? Again, because that's what the verse says, the owner died. If the owner died after one of the presentations, the blood of the sin offering was made, the remainder of the presentation should be made after his death. Right? So he's bringing a sin offering for himself, but he passed away. Yet, right, if he died before any presentation was made, so if one was made, so fundamentally it's acceptable. Therefore, the remainder of it should be presented, should also be made, because there is atonement, right? This is, by the way, atonement. Death is also atonement, so he's got like a double atonement there. If, however, he made one presentation during the day, he should not make the remaining three at night. If one made one of the presentations of blood required to be made on the inner altar, on that altar, and made the remainder on the outer altar, he's liable for chorus for offering a sacrifice outside its appropriate place. Because this was an offering for the inner altar, and you did it on the outer altar, so you didn't do it in the proper place, you are liable for, if you did it purposefully, right? That's when you get premature death, car is being cut off from heaven. Only if you did it, purposefully. Sorry, give me a second here. Okay, if one made one of the presentation of blood required to be made on the, oh, sorry, we did that. 7, if a kohen was sprinkling the blood on a sacrifice on the altar, and his hand was cut off before the blood reached the space above the altar, the sprinkling of the blood is not acceptable. Why? Because it needs to come from a person. Obviously, this is such a theoretical idea because, why would that happen? The point of this teaching is, I'm sure it never happened that someone's hand got cut off, sprinkled it. Because he has a physical blemish, right, before it reached the altar. And you can't have that physical blemish in giving putting blood on the altar. If one changed the order of the corners, the altar on which the blood was presented and bringing the sin offering, whether for a sin offering whose blood is offered on the inner altar, or a sin offering whose blood is offered on the outer altar, the sacrifice is disqualified. If however the order of presentation of blood or other sacrifices to change the sacrifice is acceptable. What's the difference? There's an order on how you're supposed to go and put it on the corners of the altar. And if you change that for a sin offering, you don't bring the atonement. And therefore, the meat that goes on the altar can't be eaten. For other sacrifices, it's acceptable. I don't know if that's because of atonement. I'm not certain. Right? If the kohen presented the blood beyond the corner of the altar, whether for a sin offering or for an other offering, or whether the inner altar or for the outer altar, the sacrifice is unacceptable. Okay. Sorry, but it's like pretty hectic.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I gotta run.
Bye, everybody.
All right.
Have a
Thank you,
great day.
folks. Have a
Thank you,
great day.
Rabbi.